This is another episode of Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. And now the architects, Doug Patt and Stephen Chung.
You are watching or listening to the Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. That is Doug. I am Steve. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning, Stephen. Good to see you, buddy.
Yeah. You don't ever want to answer my question. How was your weekend?
Oh, how was my weekend? I didn't hear you the first time. I have a hearing problem. Did I ever explain that to you?
No.
As a little guy, I had lots of surgeries on my ears, and so I'm partially deaf. So anyway, I don't always hear everything, so I apologize. It's not that I'm ignoring you. It's that I really can't hear very well.
That's going to be fantastic for this podcast going forward.
I know. It's a sad story. I don't want to bring people down at all. It's just a fact of life. And now that we've got it out there, whenever we meet our fans at some point, they'll yell at me instead of just talk to me because they know I can't hear them.
Alrighty, Doug. This weekend I sent you a link to a video by someone I know named Eric Reinhold. It was a little short video about his work in architecture. I'm going to put a link there so others can watch it. It's on YouTube. I think he's done pretty well. Like you, actually, he knows you and of you, and I'm sure he studied how you've done your YouTube channel. But what did you think about this video about? I think it was something like designing a creative life or something like that. He's an architect. He's a little younger than us, and he's sort of gone through similar kind of questions about practice and his life. What were your thoughts about it?
Well, I had a lot of thoughts. Number one, I thought it was a very well-produced video. I mean, he calls it a short film. Mm-hmm. And I really thought it was beautiful. The let's call it cinematography was wonderfully done. He had a lot of really great shots. I thought it was very creative. And I enjoyed watching it. I was blown away by the shots of the residence, what I'm assuming is his residence, because 17 steps away from this barn building that he made and now works in. So that was really impressive. What I was also struck by was the description of his journey and how similar it was, as you said, to ours. Mm-hmm. You get into practice and then you can't believe this is practice, and then you wonder what you're doing, and then you try to figure out how can I do this better, and what does it all mean, and how do I put it together and make a life out of it relative to the things that I really like to do. And that's what he does. So I think for any young architect, it's a really nice film because it wraps up, or it packages the experience of a young architect and maybe even a midlife architect. And I think it's interesting that he's found a way to create a business by using a paradigm that you and I are a little more familiar with, right? So he's created this YouTube channel. He makes videos about architecture. He's clearly an educator. And I've got to say, the guy is extraordinarily talented. I mean, his sketches are beautiful, and he's great at talking about the process of architecture. Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly for me, I don't think about architecture in the same kind of passionate terms that he does. I'm passionate about maybe the history of architecture, but he talks a lot more about the process and how important that process is, and his kind of day-to-day, how is he a creative being, and how does he do that, and how does he make architecture from that? So those are, I mean, we haven't talked about this before other than briefly, and those are my that's my perception of the video. So I would recommend taking a look.
Yeah, well, I'll end on this, is that he's younger than us, and he's out in Maine, beautiful Maine, in the woods, while you and I are sort of near cities and getting beaten up every day. And I feel like we're a little bit more, I don't know, battle worn, and has a chance to kind of sit on a rock and overlook the lake and think about architecture, which is great. But
however that's done, I mean, that's impressive, man. He's got some really wonderful surroundings that they'd be great to be able to exist inside of and make architecture from. So really neat.
Okay, so watch that video. I'm going to transition now, a beautiful segue to our topic today. flooring. You wanted to talk about flooring.
Sweet.
So you start, because when you said flooring, I said, okay, we didn't talk about it, as we often try not to do beforehand, because we want to sort of get the our first impression. And when you said flooring, what do you mean? What was your thinking behind the subject?
Well, I love these, let's call it a mundane subject, because it's really jam-packed in my mind with amazing information. And that's only relative to my experience, right? So having worked for 25 years in the field, in and out of the field, mostly in the field of architecture, and seeing all the different products that are out there and all the new stuff that's always out there. And then you go to clients and you got these wonderful resources now where at the click of a mouse, you can see all these neat options for floors today. So I think it's a jam-packed topic. And so my tips are super simple, and I'll elaborate a little on each of them. My first tip is look back to the past. So if you're designing your dream home, don't just go to Home Depot and say, okay, these are my only solutions. Go on the internet, look at Pinterest, and really think hard about what it is that you're trying to do. An example that comes to mind is when you go to 30th Street Station or Penn Station, these massive train stations in different cities, New York and Philadelphia. Go into the bathrooms, go down into the basement, and look at the floors, because somebody spent lifetimes putting these things together. So in particular, I'm talking about the tile floor, and I'm thinking about a pattern that we did in tile for a client up in Baltimore. My early career in architecture was doing all traditional work. And so what's so wonderful for me about that is I work on mostly contemporary projects today, but a lot of these homes were traditional and they're transitional, right? So there's still some traditional stuff in there, and then we do contemporary. And so I know how these things are detailed. And so I think back on this time in Baltimore, and we had a client. I won't give you their names, but they had two dogs, Morgan and Stanley, right? And so their dogs were a German Shepherd and a pug, right? So we did this addition renovation, and we did a master bath, and the master bath was this long rectangular space with matching symmetrical vanities on either side, and then individual toilet stalls, and this really big jacuzzi in the center with a series of steps up to it. Back then we did jacuzzis, and we didn't really do we did a shower and a jacuzzi. Today we mostly do just showers. But anyway, the floor was tile, and the interior designer introduced me to this pattern called the Greek key. So I looked this up on Wikipedia, and it's actually the pattern the word is called meander or meandros, and it stems from the Greek word, and it's really just a decorative border. But that border comes in lots of different configurations. So we'll show some images here of a variety of different Greek key patterns. But this is a wonderful pattern that you can find in tile floors. It's traditional, and you could end up doing a very contemporary room and put in this really beautiful traditional Greek key pattern. And this is many times done with square tiles or octagonal tiles. But it's a really neat way to dress up a room, and you will find this in lots of 20s and 30s bathrooms and tiled areas, that motif. And you'll find the Greek key too in clothing patterns and bedboards and all kinds of bed backboards and all kinds of things. So I know we're talking about floors, and specifically I'd love to see this Greek key pattern as a border in a floor. So look back to the past. There's lots and lots of wonderful patterns that you can utilize that you're not necessarily going to see in most of the homes that you're looking at today. And today I'm pretty sure you can go to Home Depot and buy the squares of this Greek key pattern and put them together, and it'll look like it was done, 60, 70, 80, 90 years ago. So first tip.
My takeaway from that was when you talked about going into the bathrooms of Penn Station for inspiration. That's where I ended. Have you been in the bathroom in Penn Station?
Not in a long time.
All right,
Why?
Okay. No, it's a little sketchy in there.
I'm so sorry. Oh, that reminds me though. Hold on. So we've got the dogs. in this house. And what we did was we set these dog bowls in the steps of the jacuzzi, left and right. And then we had them, or the interior designer had them, if I remember correctly, gilded in gold. So anyway, it was a super cool bathroom, and Morgan and Stanley did pretty well with the dog bowls.
You and your Greenwich clients. Okay, here we go. So I need to just introduce this topic because the three tips are all related to this, and it has to do with authenticity of materials.
Awesome.
Now, when we were in school, we were told that we needed to be authentic with the use of materials. Honesty in materials was always kind of a key phrase. Honesty of structure. And just to relate a quick notion, a quick idea, one of my favorite architects at the time was Mies van der Rohe. He famous for his minimal architecture. And in designing the Seagram's building in New York, he basically had steel columns, big steel I-beam columns, and of course he wanted to express that. But because it's a tall building, it's steel, it has to be encased in fireproofing, you basically could not see the steel. Yeah. And so what did he do? Well, being somehow dishonest, I thought, he put a steel beam on the outside of the structure, not structural, right? But basically just to say, on the inside of this column is this, right? And so he's always upheld as being sort of honest, authentic architect. And I thought, well, what's going on here? And I thought the same about materials, that really what's more important is your experience, perception is more important than reality. And so if I think about that now with natural materials, I think that we would say the first thing reflexively is we say, I want to use natural wood floor. I want to use a wood floor. And I think to myself, it really depends. Because given the wear and tear, the sun, the moisture, the contraction, expansion, on and on and on, you start to wonder if there's alternatives to a natural material where you could get that impression or perception that you've got a real wood floor, but in fact you have something that's not, that's been designed specifically to answer all these other questions. So it's not real wood, but it feels and you perceive it to be wood. Now, it's still a hurdle for a lot of clients, I have to tell you. I really have a hard time with this. So I would say my first tip then is to consider porcelain over, let's say, marble or marble tile or a stone floor. And this comes as a result of an experience I had doing a project with a developer where he wanted a lobby with marble floors because he went to a bank, he sees these beautiful marble floors, and I say, yeah, it's beautiful, but you're going to slip, someone's going to slip, and in this multi-family residential building, they're going to sue you, and it's not going to be good for you, I promise you. He goes, but I like the look of it. I said, but why don't we consider porcelain? And this is me as architect. Of course, I don't want to get in trouble either, because the reality is that marble is very slippery. And over time, it does wear. You do sort of get the, bends, and you get all the kind of impressions over a period of time. It's softer. But my real consideration had to do with upkeep, maintenance, all of these issues, and cost. And so he was convinced to go ahead with a porcelain floor. And, keep in mind, porcelain is clay, quartz, and I think feldspar. It is natural materials. It's a composite fired under tremendous heat, and it makes it super hard, super resistant to moisture. It just has all those capacities that make it, for long-term, a good bet. And of course, it's very cost effective. So I think getting over that hurdle that you can use something that's not natural or somehow synthetic, it's okay. And I'm an architect saying, I think it's okay. What do you think about that? All my tips are going to be about this.
No, I think that's great. I mean, it's a great segue into what I'm going to talk about a little bit. I struggled a little bit in the beginning thinking about this subject, and I went on Pinterest and I found these wonderful floors that are simply made of plywood. Okay, so bear with me here. Okay. But there are tons of images and lots of information about this. So you can have plywood substrate, and then you can take plywood and make your floor out of plywood. So there are a number of ways that I saw people did this. So they take 4x8 sheets and they cut them down to 4x4, 1x4, 1x8, 8x8, 8 inches by 8 feet, and then simply stack these pieces of plywood one next to the other on the floor. And then they use a nail gun and liquid nails, and they attach it to the floor, and it's a done deal. Now, there were a number of examples where, number one, if you buy crappy plywood, you're going to have to sand the heck out of it, right? And if you sand it and then you paint it, it's good to go. The neat thing about a plywood floor, when you do it in these wide plank bores, is it looks like barn wood floors. It really does, especially if you get a good coat of paint on these things. So I thought that was a really neat example of an inexpensive, and I'm talking really inexpensive per square foot, $18 a sheet or $25 a sheet. It takes a little bit more maintenance, and it's going to take a while to set down, and you don't have the advantage of that tongue and groove thing, right? So when you put regular wood flooring down, it's got tongue and groove, and it's fitting together. And many times you'll set it down on some felt or rosin paper and nail this stuff down. But it was a really neat example of kind of DIY way of creating a very pretty floor. And of course, you can get plywood and all these wonderful different veneer finishes as well. So you spend a little bit more money, cut them down, put them down, and finish it however you want. Now, I will say it's probably not the most durable material long term, right? But I've got hardwood floors throughout my house, and a piece of hardwood floor is solid wood, and these are veneers. Plywood is simply veneers, very thin veneers of wood glued one next to the other, and that actually technically is more stable than a piece of wood, especially if you're going to pour water on it. So anyway, really neat example. So if you go on Pinterest, and I'll show some examples here of plywood floors, it seemed like a great way to do an inexpensive floor that really looks quite beautiful.
Okay, excellent. So I also want to talk about wood because, like you had mentioned, maintenance, I think, will be a long-term issue with the plywood floor that, really depends on the sealant and how well you're able to, because you don't have a tongue and groove, how well are you going to get those plywood to butt up against each other?
Yes,
but
and you
given
don't.
its low cost, maybe it's fine. It's something that you say that, look, it's going to be a little bit worn, but it's not a lot of investment. So I also want to talk about wood because, right now, doing this hotel project, and for guest rooms, we're talking about flooring. The developer, as I mentioned, he wants to be very honest in materials. He wants to use a real hardwood for the floors. So for a hotel, I think that's a very bad idea. The hotel is in Florida, first of all. So you really have to, as an architect, you have to really think about all of these factors. So the first is, the climate there. You are dealing with a very humid climate. Yes, you have air conditioning on often when there are guests there, but it's not always on. You have concrete floors, which are very different in terms of how they move relative to wood floors. So you're going to have some kind of movement. And so I already immediately start thinking, I'm not sure if the wood is a great idea. He loves the idea that it's a natural material. Oh, we'll sand it down over time. The problem is that you've got, this is not your home. I mean, these are guests, and you drop things on wood floors, you dent them, I think it's a tough call. So my suggestion was to go with a laminate, an engineered wood floor. And what I mean by that, it is real wood, but it's very thin. It's very thin. I don't know if you can see that, but basically it's made up of a wood on top, and then it's got a kind of I guess an MDO or some sort of a plywood kind of material in between.
Could be
it's a sandwich.
HDF, high density fiberboard, or MDO, or
So it's a composite material, but because it's a sandwich and it's glued together, it's not going to move. I mean, that takes away one of the big considerations for me. It's not going to move. So you do get a real wood look because it's real wood. You are able to sand it a couple of times because it's very thin. It's not a 3/4 inch wood. It's it's very 1/8 of an inch. So maybe you can sand it twice, and you do get that look. So I love the idea that it's not going to move. You do get a real wood look, and the cost is very reasonable. I mean, I think this is like $4 a square foot, so it's very reasonable. So talk to the manufacturer about this, or actually it's a showroom, and he actually told me to think about laminate. Laminate meaning it's synthetic, not being real wood at all, looking like real wood, and actually really advocating very strongly for this because he thought the real wood it's gonna show very quickly. I think here is where maybe I backed off a little bit because upon first blush it looks like wood. But I think the feel, the bare feet, I don't think you're really touching with your hands, but the bare feet, it somehow feels, it doesn't quite feel right. And so that has to do with perception. Yes, my eyes are tricked. It looks like wood.
Yeah.
But when it comes to that touch and feel, I think in a hotel, I want it to feel somehow warm. And warm is not always just warm, but it's just that the idea that your foot is touching something that feels not too smooth or not too, I don't know, cold exactly, but it feels somehow machine-like or machine-made. And I think at that point, I really do think that engineered wood floor would be my bet. So again, thinking about this perception of reality, thinking about the cost, thinking about the maintenance, all of these things kind of led to that, to me, to make that recommendation for the engineered. Now, by the way, the developer has not taken that recommendation yet, but I think this is what goes into these kind of decisions. I mean, it's really trying to take all of these considerations and making the best recommendation. And you and I both know, Doug, that we make a recommendation. It's not always that the client is going to take this, but it's really say, hey, this is what I think is the right choice. Most often, they usually go with that choice. In this case, I think the developer's having a really hard time with saying it's not a natural material. I said it is a natural material, just thinner, but anyway. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, so that's my second tip.
Okay, well, that, again, great segue to my tip number 3. Do your floor in cork. And you say, what are you talking about? Cork, the only familiarity people have with cork, perhaps, is the corks in your wine bottle, and it's incredibly frail, and it'll fall apart, and it's brittle. Not at all. So quick story. I lived in Portugal and worked for a number of months back when I was a young guy in my early 20s. And there was a train strike. And so they put all of us on these buses and they bussed us into Oporto, which was my ultimate destination. And we ended up stopping at this cork farm. And I thought I was on the moon. There were just trees, endless numbers of trees, and they looked like they had been all half stripped. That's where you get cork. So if you go online, and maybe we'll show an image here of a cork tree. Cork trees have to be about 25 years old in order to harvest cork. And then they can harvest cork from a tree every 10 years. And it's, if you look at these things, the cork is maybe an inch to an inch and a half or something in thickness. And it comes off seemingly like very easily, right? So it comes off in these big slabs. And eventually they turn it into things like flooring. And so cork flooring is actually very, very durable. And you're talking about a material that feels soft. And people say, well, wood isn't soft, but it really is. I mean, our senses are highly, they're finely tuned, and people can really tell the difference as you walk on floors like this, that there's a softness to them and that there's a slight give to them. And cork is a wonderful flooring material that's very durable, resistant to dirt and scratches. You can use like a water-based polyurethane to finish these. We use a Bona finish on a lot of our wood floors. I believe you can use a Bona finish on these floors in lieu of a polyurethane, straight polyurethane, which you can also use. And the neat thing about these floors is they come, as you were talking about, you can get them with a substrate, which is HDF, high density fiberboard. Thank you. And so you've got this 1/8 inch thickness of cork, and then you have the HDF backing, and so those floors float. So when you put them down, you can put them down on any floor, and they're floating. You can also take cork with, I think it's slightly more thick, square or whatever shape it comes in, and you can glue it down. So you can do these things in glued down floors. But the other neat thing about cork is, if you're concerned about it, it is sustainable, right? I mean, we talked about the fact they harvest it from trees. It's very warm. It's soft. The glued down, I believe, is the one you really want to use with water. So if you've got a bathroom and you want to use cork on different surfaces, and that's also interesting. One of the first times I ever saw cork used beyond just floors was a Frank Lloyd Wright house. I believe it was the bathroom in Falling Water. There's a full bath in there with a tub and a sink, and the entire bathroom is these cork tiles, and would most likely be glued into place at that location. So cork is a wonderful material and can be really beautiful for any floor throughout the entire house, and it's relatively durable. Got to say, I've got wood floors throughout my entire house, and And we've got it in the kitchen, we've got it at the front door, and it has just destroyed. I mean, the dog has destroyed it, and the water has destroyed it. And I didn't want tile in my in my laundry, and so we did wood floors. That was idiotic. I mean, it was the dumbest move I could have made. We just replaced our washer dryer, which we had this awful washer forever that just smelled all the time. You had to add these additives to get rid of the stink, and anyway, it was leaking water. And when they pulled it away, the floor is destroyed. And we did this floor like 8 years ago. So don't do wood in your laundry. Don't be like me. I've made so many mistakes in this house, and I'm an architect. I'm always looking at Sue, and I'm like, I can't believe I did that. But you do it anyway. Cork floors are beautiful.
I'm gonna take your recommendation after that. No, but I'm with you. You know, we both designed our own homes, and I think a lot of experiments. We try a lot of things, and when you live a family life, you really sort of see what a house, you know, the abuse it takes. Yeah. Fortunately, those are experiences that I then make recommendations to other clients, and
yes,
and I've learned. So
yeah.
Okay, my last tip. Now this is funny because you're talking about all these great materials, cork and wood and marble tiles, and I'm pushing all this crud. All these synthetic materials.
No, man, I was talking about plywood.
All right. I just had an experience with artificial turf. And you're gonna think I'm nuts.
You've got to be kidding me.
You're gonna think I'm nuts. No, so it's funny because I looked at some of these websites, some of these companies, and you know they're really pushing very hard the entire lawn, right? And it's a big first-time cost. It's something like, you know, it's what is it, $5 to $20 a square foot. That's a lot of money for a lawn where, you know, you can spend nothing. But the reality is, a lawn actually does cost a lot to upkeep. So what are these artificial turf lawns or surfaces? I mean, it's really, you have a backing that's porous and you have some filaments. And yes, you can make it look like grass. And what I have tried now in a project is not a lawn, or I'm not trying to replace the entire yard. I just can't even get my mind around that, even though I've seen a lot of nice images of it. I just find it very weird that, you know, in the wintertime here in Boston, I would have, you know, a beautiful green lawn and everyone would have snow and leaves and I don't know, just dying grass, and it would just look really weird, but I kind of like that too. But anyway, so no, in terms of like a roof terrace or a sort of section, a part of a urban kind of court or garden, I think actually it's not a bad idea. And
I agree.
This someplace, and the same issue. The client said, "Oh, I don't want it to feel fake," and I said, "Let's embrace that it's fake and make it like pink." They said they like that idea. They like that idea.
You are nuts.
It's like an outdoor carpet, but it's meant for outdoor. Rains. It goes through this surface. If a dog uses it for a bathroom, you have to kind of spray it down a little bit. But it seems like a super durable, long-term kind of solution. I think you can actually clean it. So if it gets really dirty over a period of time, you can clean it. But I think in a smaller section, I think it's not a bad choice. So I'll let you know how this goes because we're trying this someplace, and I think it's a place that's hard to grow. I think maintaining a little patch of grass, I think would be difficult. And I think the idea is that, you know, they would sort of put their lawn chairs on this or something like that. And it could be a kind of a sunning place or whatever. And the amount of effort just to kind of maintain this little plot of grass, if it was real grass, didn't seem to make a lot of sense. So I think I'll let you know how it goes on this, but artificial turf, it's a little bit expensive in terms of first time cost, but there's no maintenance. And if you really do think about the life cycle cost of a lawn, a little bit of lawn, I mean, it takes some time. It takes some effort that maybe a one-time cost here we wouldn't have, or beyond the first-time cost. So, artificial turf.
Wow.
Let's see.
I never thought I'd hear that from a Harvard guy.
I propose to take Harvard Yard and put artificial turf everywhere.
Right, there you go. Stephen Chung, architect, landscape architect, genius.
All right, so those are our tips on flooring. I have a question of the week for us, Doug, about flooring, and I don't have a great answer for this. I hope you know something about it.
Okay, let's give it a shot.
Dear Doug and Steve, what are your thoughts on epoxy flooring for a house? I've seen it in commercial applications. I like the combination of the durability and the shiny look.
Oh yeah, I love epoxy floor. Yeah, man, I'm a big fan in garages. I mean, I've actually been in garages where people not only have epoxy floor, but they put pieces of carpet underneath the tires of their automobiles. So, I mean, people get really serious about the surface on the interior of their garage. Now, an epoxy floor throughout an entire home, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I'm not familiar with epoxy going down on anything other than concrete. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a very contemporary home, it's nice because if I recall correctly, I mean, it's been a while since I've seen a really nice epoxy floor, but there is a kind of softness to it, right? It's like a really nice paint job. Yeah. But in a house, I'm not so sure. I mean, I think it really depends on what you're used to experiencing, and unless you're heating the floors, I would not say an epoxy floor is going to be great in a house, but I would say an epoxy floor in a garage, in a nice home where everything is going to be well kept and you're going to keep everything clean. And that, I've got my cousin loves to work in the garage, right? He's like a mechanic and he's got a motorcycle, he's got a fast car, and sometimes he has really nice cars in there. And, he's out there all the time. It's his man cave, right? So you don't want, concrete and it's dusty, and it's, this is something you can keep, presumably keep a little bit cleaner, and it's a really nice aesthetic look. And so epoxy for an exterior garage floor, very nice.
I haven't used it for a house, but I will say, let's evaluate its properties. Is that because it's a poured material, there's no joint lines. It can be this monolithic surface, which is why I think it looks great for contemporary house, let's say. Okay. And you can also then have it go up the wall. It could be the wall, or to make it a kind of integral base. So there's no need for a base between the wall and the floor, which is kind of neat. I think that's why you see it in a lot of clean rooms and labs and things like that, because it's super easy to keep clean. Okay. It has that shiny look to it. I think for a really contemporary house, maybe for a kitchen or what you say, garage, or certain spaces, I bet it could work. I've seen it in lofts, like a cool loft in the city, something where someone wants something super contemporary. But this is kind of moving away from what we talked about with our natural materials. I mean, this is really because again, very monolithic. You can make it a crazy color. You can add any pigments to it, any chips in it. You can really make it whatever you want to make it. So I would say that if the house is super contemporary and you really like the idea of kind of making this monolithic surface, be very shiny, I think it could be a good bet. Haven't done it yet.
I think it can be expensive to put them down, and I think they're a labor-intensive floor. I only know that because one of my cousins polishes concrete floors for a living, on a massive scale, these huge warehouses. And they do or did epoxy floors. I think they're trying to get away from epoxy floors because of the labor-intensive issues with it, or nature of it.
And by the way, I'll give one more extra free tip, a bonus tip based on this, is that you go online and you see that epoxy flooring will cost X per square foot. That is nice to read, but the reality is so few people do epoxy flooring for residential application. I promise you, it's going to be very difficult to find.
Totally true.
Maybe you're in the city or whatever. So I would be wary or aware that when you see these prices quoted, what does epoxy floor cost? Call in your suburb where you live or wherever and try to find someone who does epoxy flooring for residential application. I'm sure that if someone can do it, it's going to be very expensive because it's just not it's not a heavy duty application. So if someone can do it, they're going to charge.
I'd recommend a polished concrete floor. If you want to do a really nice floor, I'd do a polished concrete floor. High polish on it.
Awesome. Okay, so this wraps up flooring. Doug, you want to take this away?
Yeah, so you've been listening to the Design Your Dream Home show with Doug and Steve. Thanks for listening or watching, and we'll see you next time.